Hey everyone, it's Matt, aka Tech Ranger, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 60 FPS PC Ultra Settings mod again on the Xbox Series X with the FPS Boost in comparison, specifically in Boston, which we all know that's our favorite stress spot in the game. So throughout the video you're going to see the FPS Boost on, then you're going to see it off with those 60 FPS settings on, and this is going to show you 3 different routes through Boston, starting at Hangman's Alley when you first enter Boston, and then going all the way to the coast, which should be a pretty good idea for you of how these things actually affect the game. Each segment will run about 1 to 3 minutes depending on which we look, and timestamps will be in the description. I'll show the route I take through Boston and then show it with the mod as opposed to the FPS Boost. So as we looked at in the last video, you do not want to use both of these at the same time. You either use the FPS Boost or you use the PC Ultra Plus settings mod. You cannot use both. If you want a little bit more information on the mod itself and maybe just some quick comparisons, you can go check out that other video. I'll have that linked above and also at the end of the video. But that's enough for housekeeping. We got our sights set on Boston in this video, so we're going to be taking a look at how the FPS Boost and the PC Ultra Plus settings for the Xbox Series X and S stack up. Jumping right into things, we're going to start with walking into Boston for the first time in Hangman's Alley, and this is totally unedited, and we're going to look at the run from Hangman's Alley all the way to Diamond City. Runs very smooth. Like, I didn't really notice any hitches. There was a little bit of that Fallout 4 jankiness when you're running upstairs, but other than that, I didn't really notice any dips in performance. Since it is nighttime, you're not going to really notice too much in terms of the quality and how it looks because it's dark out and you really can't see, and I didn't brighten this up at all. This is exactly what's in the game based on my latest load order, and we're going to do the same for the mod as well, so you can see exactly what they look like one after another. Another thing I thought was important for this comparison was to run as much as possible. That way you guys can see exactly how the game performs when you run, when using one or the other, because that is a stress point in the game, I feel like, when you put a lot of performance mods in. If you start running around, there's a lot going on screen, then that can dip the performance. So let's take that same route from Hangman's Alley to Diamond City and see how that works with the PC Ultra Settings Plus mod and the 60 frames per second. It does say it's capped in the mod, but we'll see how that stacks up to the FPS Boost. So far, I haven't really noticed anything different. I mean, maybe it's just because it's nighttime, there's not a lot going on, there's not a lot of NPCs around, and that's usually when Boston's pretty crazy, is when there's just a lot going on. So with this first example, do you really see any difference between the two? Is it worth using the mod, potentially introducing another issue in your game? I mean, you do notice a little bit more in the distance, and that's your draw distance, but is that really a big deal to you? Let me know in the comments. And then in this next section, we're going to look at Diamond City to the Hubris comics, as well as the Back Bay area, and we're going to see how that fares. It will be during the day, and we might get into a fight, so we can see how the two fare with that. For this first test, I wouldn't really be sold on the PC Ultra Plus settings mod as it is. Draw distance in a big city like this in first person isn't really a big draw for me, no pun intended, but it is personal preference. And in this section, we're going to be looking at Diamond City to Hubris Comics, which is kind of like the midpoint between Diamond City and Goodneighbor. Thought this would be a really good spot to run to, because we're liable to get in a fight, and I do want you to see what the fights look like in Boston with the FPS Boost on versus the other mod, because things are running very smoothly here, and I've not really noticed any big performance problems here. And as you can see how smooth the combat is, it looks fantastic and it feels fantastic as well. So as we get closer to the Hubris Comics area and the Back Bay area, this is a spot where there's some more enemies around, and we might get into another fight and see how the game handles a lot of enemies thrown at you at once with the FPS boost enabled rather than a mod that tries to hit that 60 frames per second target. And you'll see this firefight here play out, and then we'll switch over to the mod with the FPS boost off so you can see how that fares in this same section. We'll have the same run played out with the mod installed and the FPS boost off so you can see how this fares and how it looks, because it is during the day and there is a firefight or two that happens. So let's switch back over to the mod, and at first glance, do you really see any difference? And when we get to the sun here, also let me know if you see any visual differences. I didn't notice anything that would really make me want to use one or the other, but it is a really cool look to see both of these back to back and see what the difference really is. And when we get up here in the firefight here, you'll notice like the little frame drops here and there are a little bit more than maybe you might see in the FPS boost, even when running all throughout Boston. It's still not bad. I think overall, and like we saw in the previous video that I made on this particular mod, I think it fares really well considering what is going on screen. I mean, you just saw like an explosion, I'm shooting a lot, there's a lot of enemies, and it's running pretty well. And it's maintaining the look that Fallout 4 should have after getting that 4K patch way back when the Xbox One X came out. And maybe a little bit more with those shadows, as you can see on the wall right there, because of this mod, because it does say it can be PC Ultra settings, which again, I don't have a PC to test that, so if anyone does have a PC, runs it on Ultra settings, please let me know how this stacks up compared to that. We're very close now to the Hubris comic store in the Back Bay area, and this is where you're going to see that last firefight, and you can see how that stacks up as well, because there are a lot of enemies there like there was in the last firefight. And I think this particular section, because it's kind of small and contained, there's a lot of buildings around and you're kind of in close quarters, this might be a good stress test as well. And so far I think the mod holds up pretty well in this area. You'll see that I don't really have too many issues, if any, when I'm running through here, which is pretty much on par with the FPS boost. So if you watch both sections, let me know in the comments down below, what are you thinking? Like, is the FPS boost still good enough for you, or has this run to the middle of Boston changed your mind at all? This last section will show our run to Goodneighbor and the coast of Boston to give you a better idea of how the two fare in Boston. So let's start our run with the FPS boost from this kind of Back Bay area, and then let's head to Goodneighbor and see how things are. And as you can see, they're about the same as they were before, and that's one of the great things about this FPS boost for me, is that even across Boston, across the whole game, things have been very consistent in terms of performance. And if that's one takeaway for this video, then that might be it, is consistency. And that is important to keep you in the game, keep you immersed, because when you start seeing things like frame drops, any technical issues, it really just puts a damper on the whole experience. That said, with the FPS boost, you are losing a few things, like the volumetric lighting will be reduced, the shadows, you might see some resolution changes, and how much you see of all that will all depend on what you're playing on, whether you're playing on a monitor as opposed to a TV, or a 4K TV as opposed to a 1080p TV. Are you playing on the Xbox Series S? Are you playing on the Xbox Series X? These are things to keep in mind when trying out the FPS boost and then popping over and checking out the mod with the FPS boost off. I was going to pop into more buildings here in Goodneighbor. I didn't feel like the performance would really change too much when you're inside as opposed to outside, just because when you're inside there's a lot less going on, whereas outside, especially in Boston, there's just a lot more going on in general. Keep in mind as well, this is all recorded on the Xbox Series X, so if you have the Xbox Series S and want to try the FPS boost, do the same route. Let me know in the comments down below what your experience is. If you encounter any more hitches or anything like that, I would be interested to know. And this is going to bring us to the end of the look for the FPS boost through Boston. Hopefully that was helpful, and then we're going to take one last look at the PC Ultra settings mod and see how that stacks up in this last section. So as we move into this last section with the PC Ultra Plus settings mod, you'll see some more differences as we head to Goodneighbor. You'll see some more kind of stress points where the frame rate drops here and there. Nothing major, but it is to be expected because there's a lot of shadows going on, there's a lot of lighting going on, and there's also a high enemy concentration here because you got things like super mutants, you got raiders running around as well. And then you are getting closer to Goodneighbor, which is an actual city. As we round the first corner here on our way to Goodneighbor, you'll see I get in a little scuffle with these super mutants, and here I do notice some frame rate drops, and it's probably pretty apparent on the video. It was for me when I was playing the game. Nothing major again, like we're talking, you know, going from 30 frames per second back in the day, like to subpar 30 frames per second. On like a regular Xbox One versus like now where it's pushing towards that 60 frames per second target. Like I mentioned in my first video ever talking about 60 frames per second mod on the Xbox Series X, it's really not that big of a deal when you see a drop here and there. It just, like I say, it takes you out of the immersion just a little bit. Not a really big deal, but if you're going from like 30 frames per second to like a sub 30 frames per second on like an Xbox One, it is kind of a big deal there. So making our way back to the coast, kind of where near the railroad HQ is, that's where we're going to hit that little super mutant base and then get probably some more frame drops because it is kind of an intense area in terms of performance. I always had some issues here myself with performance before I even got the Series X. Specifically in this area I would drop a lot. And even with this mod, you do see some frame drops here and there. It does look really good though, and you do see a lot of nice shadow detail going on. And I think that would probably be the takeaway with this mod, is that it does give you that, but it is at the expense of some performance. In conclusion, I think it's going to be down to how you like the look of either. I think Boston is a pretty good representation of the better graphics that you're going to see throughout the game versus the FPS Boost. And really, I didn't notice a ton of difference between like draw distance, lighting, and shadows to really make me want to use the mod over the FPS Boost, because I did have a more solid experience with the FPS Boost, but that might not be the same for everyone depending on your load order, so that is also something to keep in mind. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you watch the entire thing. I will have my load order video soon for my current load order, and then I'll also put that at the end of this video once I have it, and also in the description. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.